Hey everyone, welcome to the GTR Nexus Podcast. We do this every 2 weeks. This is our fourth one now. I'm joined by Plain Simplex
Hello, everybody.
and the one,
Hey.
and of course I'm your host Ren. So today we're just gonna go over a week in review, what happened last week with E3. So we're gonna talk about what we expect to happen going forward as a result of E3, as the big announcements that Microsoft made, and with Nintendo and Sony, of course. And then we're going to talk about Square Enix, because I think that Square Enix is kind of it's a big name in the industry. It always has been, but recently they've been really slow with their game releases. So we're going to discuss what are the possible reasons for that and how that sort of hurt Sony mostly from E3, because there's a big partnership between those two, and this time around there was no real big announcements from them. But we'll get into that more later on in the stream. And then we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. It just came out this week, yesterday. As of yesterday, the review is on the website. You can check it out at gtrnexus.com. There will be a link in the description later on once the stream goes live after it's recorded. So let's get right on into the first topic here. We're going to talk about E3, since it's come and gone now, so we can talk about what we thought was great, what we didn't like about it, what we expect for the rest of the year, going into next year. So let's just start out there. We'll start with the who won E3. So there's an article on the site about who won E3. It's basically analyzing the three different press conferences of the three console manufacturers, that being Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And anybody who follows E3 would be well aware of the competition between those three companies and the different alliances that they build with different third-party developers, or in Nintendo's case, the lack of third-party developers. But, so what do you guys think? Like, who do you guys think won, in your opinion? And then we can just discuss with the chat.
Undoubtedly Microsoft.
Undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly.
Undoubtedly Microsoft?
Undoubtedly.
I think it's like a tie between Microsoft and Nintendo. In terms of games, I think Microsoft takes it. But of actually having something to show that isn't going to put me to sleep, I think Nintendo kept my attention. Microsoft definitely kept my attention. So Microsoft probably takes the lead on that.
Well, you gotta think here, like, presentation-wise, too. Nintendo, they didn't do their thing live like they did last year.
I think a lot of people just put Nintendo really, really low. So if they do anything, they kind of surprise us all. I was actually expecting them to, like, what they did, honestly, is nothing spectacular. But for Nintendo, they have their own scale. Because honestly, what we're grading is like PlayStation, Xbox, and the other IPs like Ubisoft and stuff like the Square Enix.
Yeah, those. We'll talk about the actual, like, the developers that hold press conferences.
But as far as the big three, undoubtedly Xbox. I get it, but Nintendo did good for themselves. For, like, if Nintendo's competing with their previous years, I think they did good. They can pat themselves on the back.
Oh yeah, they did better than last year. But, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that Microsoft is first and Nintendo second. But what's interesting is if you look at the social media survey results. So that's I took this from Synthesio, which is basically online. I think they're like a marketing research group. So the data from them shows that Microsoft won only by what, 1%, 1.22%. Like 25.3, basically 25, just over 25% favored Microsoft, or they were the most interested in Microsoft, what they had to say and show. And Nintendo was 24.11%, so they were barely, that's a really close second. And then EA, Activision, then it actually goes to the developers. So Sony, you can see Sony's actually down there in the bottom three, whereas Microsoft and Nintendo are both number 1 and 2.
Sony picked a bad year just to do the run-of-the-mill stuff. I think if they would have tried to pull this maybe 2 years ago, when they actually won by a landslide, that would have been a good year just to try to mull the crowd over. This time, when I was watching the press conference, I actually found myself falling asleep during the VR segments. Microsoft, it was like the exact opposite. They showed, I don't know if a lot of them were independent or just exclusives, but definitely when they started showing like the fighters, the Dragon Ball Z one, that really stood out to me, of course. But Sony really didn't have anything that caught my attention. Everything they showed, I already knew about. Like the God of War, I already knew about the No Man's Sky DLC. Not No Man's Sky. Why did that name come in my head? Horizon Zero Dawn. Sorry about that. But yeah, Sony didn't really catch my attention this year.
Yeah, I would agree. Sony's was actually really underwhelming. Like there was a handful of things actually stood out. They showed more of God of War. They showed more of Days Gone. I think
that Detroit game.
Yeah, but they've shown stuff like that before, though. So
Yeah,
it's just
nothing
more.
new.
Monster Hunter.
Yeah, the Monster Hunter was that new?
Yep.
That was the first time it was shown?
Nope. It was the first time.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that was the first time they
That's
showed it.
why the guy presenting, the guy talking, he was excited about it.
But I think the reason why Sony lost is because they kind of set themselves up to lose, because they really didn't. When you think about it, they don't have anything really to show this year. The Switch came out earlier this year, so Nintendo had a lot of big announcements for it, and they were able to deliver on that. And then Microsoft had everything to gain because they have yet to release their console. So they actually, I think Microsoft won because they had all the hype at this point, because the Switch is already out. So all Nintendo can do is show games. And then we all know Nintendo doesn't really do the traditional press conference anymore. They haven't done it in a number of years. So they've done, what they do is they call it Nintendo Direct. And it's basically just like, I don't even know how it is for the people who are live on, like actually at E3 when Nintendo does their press conference. Like if it's on some big TV screen somewhere in the booth and there's the people walking by can see it. And they just listen to Reggie talk about Zelda and Metroid and all that stuff that they showed, and Splatoon 2.
I would hope so. I would imagine the press would get really annoyed if they would have to sit through it. It might just be like a pass-by sort of thing, because honestly, E3 is majorly for the press, and they're old. They don't want to sit through a whole thing like that. Honestly, I did watch part of the stream with Malcolm, but the Nintendo Direct, their whole segment, it was so familiar. It seemed just like last year, but I did like what they showed. That's something that goes to their credit.
What would excite me would be an announcement for a new Metroid, and they announced a new Metroid. So
you heard it's going to be a remake. It's a remake of. Hold on, I'll link you to information. But that aside, Sony, the reason that they were kind of lackluster, they didn't have anything for their new hardware. Their newest piece of hardware was the PS4 Pro. Sadly, they have they're above Nintendo in the hardware department. They have the PS4 Pro, the PS4 Slim. They have the PS Vita still, which has very little support at this point. They have a lot of consoles. It's just that they don't really show enough support for them at this time, which is what E3 is usually for, to show what's coming out, get people excited, get their wallets ready to buy stuff for your console. But Microsoft, they just took advantage of the Xbox One X. Bad name or console, but it still caught my attention.
Yeah.
The price point isn't bad. It's in a good color, matte black. Your stains aren't going to show, kids. You know, they won, and you get why.
Yeah, I think it's also going to be available in white as well, but I'm not sure.
The only problem people have been complaining about is the price.
Really?
Yeah, I think that's the only big thing. But see, in terms of E3 though, in terms of winning E3, Microsoft definitely won, because now the thing that I noticed that they did that was actually really surprising was not only did they start off by immediately announcing the name of the Project Scorpio as the Xbox One X, so it kind of returns them back to the way they were with the original Xbox back in the day when the marketing theme was the power of X, like witness the power of X, and that's how it was. So that they also announced the backwards compatibility for Xbox 360 games, which I think they already had on the original Xbox One. But not only that, but it was the original Xbox. They announced OG Xbox games backwards compatibility, and the crowd cheered like way louder than they did when they even announced the X. So that was pretty interesting. Because there are actually some pretty good games on the original Xbox. In my opinion, the original Xbox had better... It had a more diverse lineup than the 360. The 360 is what I think gave the Xbox that image of just being a console that has nothing but first-person shooters and nothing else, and it lacks variety.
That's the only thing they had exclusive. You got to remember when the original Xbox came out, there were a whole load of exclusives.
Yeah.
For a game to be shared on PlayStation 2 and Xbox, it was a rarity. But once the PS3, that third generation right there, and the Xbox 360, the exclusives really started to trim and die down from that point. Like, I remember specifics like Godfather 3, when that was Godfather 1, when it was remastered for the Xbox, the Dawn Edition. That was one thing you could only get on the PlayStation 3 at the time. Certain games like that, that's what made you want to buy it in the early lifespan. But as soon as you get to that second year that you're on the PlayStation 3, you're noticing every game's coming out for the Xbox now. It's like when I found out that Tekken Tag 2 was coming to the Xbox 360 and stuff like that, I just realized, okay, exclusives kind of aren't real anymore. And that's kind of where the market for the Xbox and PlayStation, people just stick with what they have at this point, or whatever's cheaper.
Well, what I think is going to work in their favor with the Xbox One X, but the only problem with it is the price of it, because I think that it's going to be a hard sell just because it's $499 or $500, so it's $100 more than the Pro, and they really have to prove that it's that much better. Because I remember back in the 6th generation, so that's PlayStation 2 and Xbox, those two, Xbox was the most powerful console when it came out, and then second was, well, see, the GameCube is weird because the GameCube actually was pretty good, but Nintendo chose to go with that weird disc that they use, like a mini DVD. It was like really small, and I think that hindered them in terms of how many different textures they could put in the games, the graphics. Because I remember, like, the thing is with multi-platforms on the original Xbox, aside from the controller, because I know the PlayStation controller was always more favorable for a lot of different games, especially like fighting games and stuff like that, compared to the Xbox controller, which had to be completely redone when it was released in Japan as the Xbox, I think it's like controller type S or something, and that eventually became the standard controller, and then eventually they redid it with the 360 controller, which was way better. But the original Xbox was definitely the most powerful console, and I remember games like Soul Calibur 2, it just loaded way faster, it looked way sharper and better than on the PS2. Other games like Fatal Frame, like all kinds of multi-platform, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, lots of these really good. I mean, they even got deals with Sega back when the Dreamcast died. Xbox basically took over for Sega, and they got the Shenmue and not Shenmue 1, but that was Dreamcast. But Shenmue 2 was on the Xbox. So the original Xbox had some really good, strong exclusive titles, and even in the multi-platform games, the Xbox was way superior to the PlayStation 2, with the exception being, in some cases, the GameCube also was pretty much almost on par with the Xbox, but I mean, the Xbox was still faster at loading, and just everything looked better. I mean, in some few rare instances, you could actually play games at 720p on the Xbox original, which was very rare back then. That was like bleeding edge. So I'm excited in the sense that now that the One X is definitely going to be the strongest console, will they be able to build off of that and sort of retake a lot of what they lost to Sony over the course of this PS4 and Xbox One era?
I believe they will, because their timing is impeccable. Honestly, you know how these slim consoles and the Xbox One S as in Snake, Gotta emphasize. But when these slim consoles come out, they're only going to last for 5, maybe 3 years for some people, because they're not built the same way the originals are. So people are going to be looking to upgrade anyway. And a lot of people who still have the original versions of the Xbox One might be looking to upgrade because they're getting some faulty fuse issues, like the power chip might be melting to whatever, something's happening with their console. It's a lot of dust accumulating. They don't feel like cleaning it out, whatever the deal is. But majority of people are still, who have an Xbox One, they're probably gonna upgrade eventually. Like, the timing's perfect, I think, for the console release. But the price might hinder sales, like, initially.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's really going to be that $500 price point that's going to make it really hard to justify to people. I mean, they did a good job in the beginning of the press conference where they're talking about the specs. They said that it uses a vapor chamber cooler. Which, I mean, to people who actually know, like, how semiconductors are designed and how they're cooled, it's not really that much of a wow factor. But to typical consumers, it's just marketing fluff. It sounds like it's really cool and advanced because they've got a vapor chamber, which is basically, it's a hollow metal object that has water inside of it, that's trapped inside of it. So when the graphics or the CPU, or I guess it's an APU actually, heats up, the water in there will vaporize, and then it'll evaporate to the top of that chamber, and then it'll immediately turn back into water and fall back down. So it's like a cycle. So it uses water's high heat capacitance to actually make the temperatures run cooler on the console. And that's actually really good, because I think they needed to do that to show that, hey, we know we had hardware issues in the 360 era with the Red Ring of Death, and there's some minor issues that people have been reporting with the Xbox One, but we've actually taken that into account this time around. We've actually, like, worked on the quality, so I think that'll help them this time around. But again, it's still gonna be, I mean, part of it was also they're trying to show all that stuff to try to justify the $500 price point. But we'll have to see. Like, it remains to be seen how much better the games will look on the One X compared to the regular, like the One S, and how it compares, if it's a multi-platform, how will it will perform and compare to the PS4 Pro, because I think that's really going to be their primary competitor in this arena. I think Phil Spencer, he was interviewed by, I think, GameSpot or IGN or somebody. I think it was GameSpot. I remember listening to him talk, and he was saying that in his mind, they don't actually see the Pro as a competition. They consider the Pro only on the same level as the other consoles, like the One S, the regular PS4, Slim, the Switch, and all those other guys. So I don't know what he means by that, because I think the Pro is marketed as a more premium console, and I think your average consumer is going to pit those two against each other, because it's like, what's Sony's best? It's the Pro. What's Microsoft's best? It's the One X, right? So
I think he was just thinking about the release dates in general. Honestly, the hardware is more impressive. We all know that. I just think that you know what they're doing. They're releasing it right before Black Friday. So a lot of people are thinking, oh, I'm going to get it on sale. Because by the time people are going to be buying it, they're going to be wanting it because they've seen it. They've seen Xbox One X, summertime. It's going to be sitting in their system all the way to September when people are about going back to school. So all those kids who are like say 10 to 13, 15, that area right there where they have summer jobs and shit like that, they're going to want the Xbox One X Black Friday. That's the plan. The parents are going to get it for them. And people who are just Xbox fans who like Gears of War and et cetera, Halo, Destiny, stuff like that, they're going to buy it. And saving that $20 on Black Friday will actually boost sales. So I think the marketing team, if anything, they know what they're doing at the very least. Like we said, the hardware is impressive. It has to be, because if they're releasing it that late in the game from the PS4 Pro release, which was a little bit ago right now, but they have to kind of compete. So I guess him saying that isn't too far-fetched. Is it actually that far of a gap in hardware? Who knows? But he has to say that to sell the console. I would.
Right. He can't say that, oh, it's like the Pro. No, because, I mean, definitely, in terms of the hardware specs, it's not. It's definitely a notch above the Pro. But it still remains to be seen how developers will take advantage of all that extra horsepower. So, and then, of course, there's the PC. And one thing the other thing, so there was two things besides just them announcing the One X that I found interesting. One was that they didn't show anything with Halo or Gears of War. They completely, it's not like they pretended that those franchises didn't exist, but they didn't really mention or talk about those franchises. It's almost like they're trying to sort of reimagine their brand. Like with these games like Anthem, there's an article on the site by the one that's talking about the top 5 games shown at Microsoft's press conference. Anthem was shown. They showed it toward the end. That was actually a pretty amazing looking game. Ashen, Sea of Thieves, that was a pretty cool looking game too. It looked unique, at least from what they showed. Metro Exodus and Super Lucky's Tale, that was like a straight up competitor to what Sony has with Ratchet and Clank and what Nintendo has with Mario and all the other different platformers. But it's almost like they're trying to show that, hey, we're not just a first-person shooter or third-person shooter console. We have other stuff out there. And I think they did a good job. Like, I really like that they showed more than just... I'm actually glad they didn't mention Halo, and I'm glad they didn't show anything with Gears of War on it.
I think they're learning from their previous showcasings. Honestly, Gears of War 4 did well. It was like a 9.3 on IGN the last time I checked. Halo 5, Guardians did well. They were well received for the games that they are, but like people who are down the rabbit hole in the franchise, they probably have things they want to say about that. But that aside, the games are fine. It's just that I think they know that they want to reach a larger demographic than what they already have. Because they know that the diehard Xbox fans who are comfortable with that console, they're going to buy it again. It's just, I think they are trying to get their outreach a little bit bigger.
Yeah, they know that they have their strong first-party games and their franchises, but they know they also, like, when they're compared to Sony, it's always one of those things where, oh, they don't have variety. I mean, all they have is, like, you immediately think of Master Chief or the people in Gears of War. It's like, oh, that's the first thing that comes to mind. You don't really think of anything else when you have to think of Xbox. Someone asks you to list, like, 5 unique Xbox games that do not have Halo or Gears of War in the name. It becomes more of a challenge. It's like, and you can't pick like random multi-platform franchises like FIFA and Madden.
The only one you can name is Dead Rising off the top of your head.
Yeah, like, it becomes much harder to see. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, they need to show that, hey, we have exclusives. So all these world premiere exclusive or Xbox first exclusive or whatever. The other thing too is they're competing against themselves with the PC, because they did mention for some of the games that they will be Xbox One and Windows 10. That's the phrase that's the terminology that they used. So it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, we have a console, but you guys know we also are the ones that are the dominant PC gaming platform in terms of the operating system, because the only alternative is Mac and Linux. And although you can
trust me, it's not the same. It's all emulator based.
Yeah, it's not the same. Now you can run some Steam games on Linux.
Valve has really good support for Linux, but then again, you got to make sure you're on the right OS. You want to make sure your version's updated. It's a lot to it.
Yeah,
like, unless you know a little bit about Linux, like the optimization, and your library is kind of limited. Like, if you're an MMO player, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not that many options.
There's not a whole lot of choices there. And then there's the whole nightmare of, will the game run without crashing on me because of some random driver issue with NVIDIA or AMD? So then, I mean, there's that whole problem as well, because the drivers on Linux are completely different than they are on Windows.
Unless you want to feel like you're developing it yourself, it's a lot of work. Trust me, I'm back on Windows.
So
I love
they
it.
kind of like, I like how they threw that out there. It's like, Windows 10, you know, that's us. All you Steam people out there. So that's basically E3. We all kind of think that Microsoft won. Nintendo was pretty close though. I just feel like Nintendo does need to return. I don't know if it's like a budget problem or whatever, but I think that Nintendo does need to return back to the traditional press conference and stage demos and stuff like that, because the way they are, I mean, it works what they do with their Nintendo Direct, but I don't think it allows them to really like connect with the people that are there at the event, right? Because they don't have a very strong presence anymore compared to the other two. And then Sony lost, in my opinion, Sony lost because Square Enix had nothing to announce. Otherwise, I feel like Sony probably could have been right up there with Nintendo if they had shown something with Kingdom Hearts 3 or something with Dissidia, because we all know Dissidia is coming out next year. We have no idea when Kingdom Hearts is coming out. You know, those sort of things. I don't know why that stuff wasn't announced. I don't remember if instead they go and announce VR, Final Fantasy 15, Noctis' fishing VR.
Made them lose.
Something, and then, yeah, it's like, we're just admitting defeat by doing that. It's like, so, that was E3. So that leads us, right? That's actually a good segue into the next topic about Square Enix. So what's the deal with them?
Square. Oh my god. They have a history with me, dude. There was this great game on PlayStation 2 called The Black Bouncer. It's like a third-person
Oh yeah, I remember that game.
Oh, it had so much potential, dude. So much potential. But like Square Enix does, dropped. Never heard of it from again, you know. I want to know what happens to Sion Farzad. I know the names. It's ridiculous. Kolefau. I know names. Like, I just wish that Square Enix, when they commit to something, they would commit to it. Like, this Kingdom Hearts, I'm not a Kingdom Hearts fan. I played the first one. Crucify me. But I'm explaining from the outsider perspective how ridiculous what Square Enix does to you Kingdom Hearts fans is. They're going to release Kingdom Hearts. This has probably been done already. To the outside person looking in, no game should have a 2 point anything. It should be a distinctive number. Kingdom Hearts 1, Kingdom Hearts 2. There should be no 2.3, 2.4, 2. No, there should not be 2.5 remake. Nothing.
I think that's
that is the most insulting practice I've ever heard. I don't know if people like that. It just from the outsider perspective, it's batshit crazy.
I think the best one was the one on was it on the Game Boy or the DS? Was the Kingdom Hearts 358 and divided by 2 days or something. They didn't put a decimal, they decided to put a fraction that time.
See, like, I feel like if you weren't grabbed by the first one, you could never understand, dude.
I think that's just them trying to be unique, and it's like, that's a thing of Kingdom Hearts. It's like, we use decimal numbers to indicate sequels or additional games.
Not even sequel.
Well, this point,
it's just a remake in most of them.
Yeah, it's like
it's
Kingdom
a remastered
Hearts
version.
2.5 final remix for the PlayStation 4. There was already don't forget there was Kingdom Hearts 2.5 remix for PS3, and Kingdom Hearts 1, and then Birth by Sleep, and all these other ones.
See, I'm getting pissed just
Final Prologue 2.8. Well, we all know we're gonna need 2.9.
Drop distance and all them inside of it. 2.9 is coming out.
2.9 is coming out this fall. Watch. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't even know what it would consist of.
But the whole the whole fiasco with Final Fantasy VII Remake now being taken away, and they're having to like reevaluate whether it's feasible to do this, and now they're having second thoughts of whether they really want to do this.
It's gonna hurt. Oh my gosh, that's gonna hurt their fan base so much.
Well, the problems were that and we'll probably put an article on this on the site in the future once we have more information on it. But so Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced. They start working on it. Then they're like, we don't want to work on this right now. We have to work on Final Fantasy 15, Kingdom Hearts 3, Dissidia, porting that from the arcade, and then, of course, the Juggernaut now, which is kind of when we'll talk about this in the next topic, but why I feel like Square Enix is slowly turning into a Japanese Blizzard Entertainment equivalent, because now they have a cash cow MMO that's really it's a really good game and all, but it's like, now, well, we need 30 more people to help work on this content for Final Fantasy 14, so we can't have them work on Final Fantasy 7. That's not as important. It doesn't make us any revenue, so we need to we need to farm it out. So basically what they did was they're like, let's find another Japanese company, some smaller team that we can have them work on 7. So I don't know what the company's name was, but they basically farmed it out to a third party. They start working on 7, and then like 6 months later, they show them what they've done, and the director, whoever was in charge of the project at Square Enix, was like, no, this is all wrong. No, sorry. So then they cancel. They pull it back in-house, and now they're having to reevaluate and decide, well, who's going to work on what. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII isn't going to be showing up anytime soon.
That's just bad organization. You need a scrum. There's simple things that can be fixed. Here's where Square messes up on a lot of things from the outsider perspective, because I'm sure somebody in the comments will correct me, and I hope you do, so I can actually be enlightened on their production, because this is why I think it's a failure on the most part. When you say that they need 30 developers from Final Fantasy XIV, the MMO, that is generating a lot of money via subscriptions, it's kind of redundant to me. How much money does Square Enix need to stay functional? How much do they need to consider that they need a profit outside of their market shares and et cetera, initial sales? Then they have the subscriptions, then they have in-game purchases, and et cetera, et cetera. They released Hitman as an episodic.
Yeah,
Hitman.
And that's the other thing too.
Release.
Yeah, they've acquired these Western developers, like the guys who did the Tomb Raider reboot, Rise of the Tomb Raider, the Hitman series. They've got all these other developing studios. Why don't they have those guys work on Final Fantasy VII? Like, why do you have to, like, either do it yourself or get one of your other studios to work on it? Because if you look at how they used to crank out games way faster than they used to, than they do now, and they were also really good games. Final Fantasy VII came out, then 2 years later 8 comes out, and then a year later 9 comes out, and then 2 years later 10 comes out. It's like, in the course of half a decade, they've released 4 different Final Fantasy numbered series in the franchise.
The problem is,
and one of them was on the PS2.
They have to progress. That's the problem. Final Fantasy, it's digging its own grave, because as a result of making such a great game, other developers who have played the games know how to write a good story. They know how to develop good levels, know how to create good bosses. So Square Enix is going against games like Dragon's Dogma, et cetera, Dark Souls, games that actually engage people. And then there's real RPGs. There's more of a diverse market for games now than when the original Final Fantasies came out. And that's of course. So when Final Fantasy 14 or 15 comes out, yeah, it's going to be up to a certain standard for some people because it takes forever to launch. Square Enix is a bigger company. That shouldn't be the problem. Hiring good writers is not a hard thing if you're not cheap. Right. If you're cheap, that's where most of your problems come from, because you're going to be doing less outsourcing, recycling people that you're familiar with, instead of looking who's better for the product. Because if you're paying somebody a set price, no, you're going to get rid of that person because he wants that price. You're going to go find somebody else who works for cheaper, even though his work is not going to be as good. So that's where the problem where Square Enix is coming from, I believe. It's just cheapness overall. And as you can see it in their products for the most part. Because I wouldn't even play the newest Hitman because it's insulting. I'm sure it's a great game, because honestly, Hitman Absolution, it got a lot of hate and flack too because it was a changing in direction in some cases. But I love that game.
Yeah.
But if you're just going to compartmentalize a full game and charge me portions so I can keep buying it and guarantee a sale, if you don't trust that initial sale for a $60 release title, don't release it. It's that simple. Yeah. You don't want to make money the proper way. Don't make money.
Are we referring to 7? How it's supposed to come out in parts?
Oh,
yeah.
Don't get me started. It's a practice. I'm sure there's other factors involved, but to the consumer, this is a slap in the face.
They're copying what Blizzard did with StarCraft 2. How StarCraft 2 was originally going to be a single game, just like how StarCraft 1 was, and then it may have had an expansion pack that came later, like Brood War. But then they were like, oh, you know what? No, we're going to split this up. We're going to release the game in parts. So it's like, the Terran campaign was the first, so that's the StarCraft 2 that I remember, because that was back, it was Like The Thing, StarCraft 2 had been announced for years ago, like since 2008, and it did, or maybe 2007, I forgot when, but it came out way later in like 2010, July or something, and then it wasn't the complete game because you didn't have the story for the Zerg, the story for the Protoss. You couldn't even play as like they remove units, they change some things up, they put new units in, and then you had to wait for Heart of the Swarm and then Legacy of the Void, and now you finally have the full StarCraft 2, like what it was supposed to be. So.
Oh, and they aren't even done there, because they just still add more campaign thingies, like campaign packs.
Yeah, they can do that also.
Like the whole Nova.
I mean, I get it.
thing.
It's a revenue model that works to try to get more money over time without having to go back to the drawing board from step one and invent a whole new game. But that's what happens when you have the larger companies, because now you have you have a lot more overhead. You have a lot of other people in the company whose only purpose in the company is to find out additional ways to generate revenue, whether that's DLC, whether that's additional campaigns, expansions, whatever, or subscriptions. I mean, those are the sort of things that the big companies like Blizzard and Square Enix can do. And then it's also about acquiring smaller development studios, like the guys who did Deus Ex, Human Revolution, and Mankind Divided, and then Hitman, of course, and then the Tomb Raider reboot. They're all like, Square Enix is the publisher, and then they also have like the small Japanese studios like Tri-Ace, the guys who do Star Ocean, and then they probably have like a handful of other guys who just do mobile games that are Japanese only. So it's one of those things like, why, if they have the ability to manage all of this going on, why is it so hard to make
under one banner? It's not just like you know how different companies have subsidiaries. Rockstar has Rockstar North, Rockstar UK. They split up the blame. Bethesda has Bethesda Softworks, Bethesda Gameworks. Square Enix is one banner. All the blame goes to Square Enix, which honestly probably isn't fair, but that's their fault for not showing us who's giving us the shit. If you show me who's serving me the shit on the plate, and I'll point the finger. If you don't do that, it's not my fault for pointing the finger in Square's direction. The difference if all this Skyrim VR that we saw at E3, the reason that Bethesda gets so much shit is because they're giving us shit, but we're pointing the finger in the right direction. We're pointing at the Bethesda Softworks because that's who's not making the games. That's the people responsible for making the acquiring subsidiaries, acquiring IPs, acquiring people to make the games, but they're not actually making the game itself. Because I'm sure Bethesda GameWorks hasn't touched Skyrim since the Dragonborn DLC. Honestly, Square Enix, if they were to actually come out with subsidiaries explaining who's responsible for so-and-so, I think a lot of the blame that they get would be dispersed the right way. That's just something else that they should be done too. Their marketing department is kind of shit as well. And their fan base is toxic, and they won't actually question what they do. So, a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 10 years for Final Fantasy 15 is kind of, that's already beyond the limit. But, you know, Final Fantasy 7 Remake is pretty much going to be like maybe something like Final Fantasy 15, where you won't see it until like 2025 or something.
How long did it take you to beat Final Fantasy 15?
Final Fantasy 15, I started and I didn't play for a while, but then I finished it. Probably the campaign was like 24 hours, somewhere around there. I know it was less than 30.
And do you plan on replaying it within the next 2 years?
See, if it wasn't for Final Fantasy 14, which I actually think is a better game, well, we're going to talk about that next. Probably not. I don't know. I mean, they're trying these things with these seasonal events that they're adding into Final Fantasy 15 and these extra content pieces and these patches that they're adding, but I don't know. It's just kind of weird how they're handling it, because it's a numbered Final Fantasy. You kind of think these games have an image where it's like the game is the whole game, and that's it. And if they're going to do a Final Fantasy 15-2, then so be it. But Final Fantasy 15, it's there, it's done. I mean, that should be it. Like, what they're doing with it is kind of weird.
10 years of development for a day of gameplay. Do you know how much hours I clocked into Skyrim on PC? Almost 3 years worth of gameplay total. I don't know how long Bethesda developed Skyrim. I know it's a different genre of game. Final Fantasy is a little more hands-on. But at the end of the day, 10 years of development for a day of gameplay. And I'm sure he did a lot of side quests, because I would have brushed through it because I don't care about the story at all in Final Fantasy. Crucify me. But honestly, that's not fair to the consumer. Because a lot of people who buy those games care a lot about Final Fantasy. I see people getting Final Fantasy tattoos, and I completely don't get it. But I understand. They care about that thing. They care about what the story is, etc., etc., etc. It's not fair. And life's not fair, of course. People have to make money. Companies have to eat. We all get it. But from the consumer, it's a big slap in the face. More information would be nice.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to find out what will happen with Final Fantasy VII, as well as Kingdom Hearts 3. I really think Kingdom Hearts 3 is going to come out soon. Soon meaning within the next 2 years.
You know what? A normal gamer would consider soon to be 3 months. Square Enix fans have to wait 2 years, and that's considered soon. Final Fantasy VII will probably, most of you fans right now will have grandchildren by the time it's out. I'm exaggerating hyperbole, but still, that's unfair. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should just come with a very concise conclusion to a franchise and move on and focus their attention. Like let's say Stormblood recently came out. Since Square Enix, they can't send 30 developers to work on 15 and 7, the remake. Why don't you just stop? Just drop it and make Stormblood way better. Focus all your attentions on one thing if you can't split. If you can't do the split properly, don't do it. I'm sure a lot of people will be disappointed if the 7 remake doesn't come out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you promise them and you yank their chain with trailers and all this information and it doesn't happen, that's even worse than attempting and failing is bad, but attempting and keep pushing back and keep continuing to hurt fans and hurt your business, it makes people disinterested. And when it finally comes out, you get what Final Fantasy is. Final Fantasy 15 happened. It was mediocre, honestly. For a game that with that much hype, how much I've heard about it on YouTube before it came out and after, very mediocre results. I'm sure a lot of people were happy with it, but I've seen hype trains come to a crash and hype trains come to, like Undertale is indie. The amount of information I've heard about that game and I still haven't played it, I feel like I've played it, the amount of information I've gotten. Final Fantasy 15, I don't even know who the main character is.
Yeah, Final Fantasy 15, I mean, I was just glad that it wasn't a total disaster, because it had been in development for so long, and I remember how Final Fantasy 13 was hit with mixed reviews. Like, some people thought it was great, some people thought it was okay, some people hated it. And then I was thinking, oh, well, what's going to happen with 15? Is 15 going to end up like Final Fantasy 13? But then they changed it a lot. I mean, they changed the gameplay a lot. They tried to, like, put a little bit of, like, open world sandbox type of exploration into it. But really all they did, if you look at it just objectively from, like, a game design point of view, they took 13 and they flipped it. So meaning 13 was linear in the beginning, and then it was open world in the second half. Final Fantasy 15 was open world in the beginning, and it was linear in the second half. So it ended up being where it's like, oh, let's just invert 13 and see if anybody notices. It's like, I was surprised that they were actually able to pull it off, because no one complained, because like, oh, it's open world, we're driving around in a car, we're just like exploring the world like GTA style. But at the end of the day, it was still like the second part of the game was still very linear. It was just like Final Fantasy 13 in that regard. And I would argue that I actually thought 13's environments and world was a lot more varied and interesting to look at than 15. So
I just feel like a lot of games that are new in that same genre as Final Fantasy 15 are done better, quicker, with a lower budget. I just can't imagine. I can't justify.
yeah. And the other thing that disappointed me was how 15 performed on the PlayStation 4 on the base model. It ran pretty lousy. It was like 30 FPS with random frame drops into like 20, the low 20s. So it reminded me of how Dark Souls ran on the PS3, the original release, and then they never were able to fix it. And it's like you waited for the PC port, and then everything was fixed. And then when they did the Steam release, it was just all way better. But anyway, yeah, 15 was okay. It was a good game. I wouldn't say it was a bad game, but I would not say that it was an exceptional game either. It was just what it was. It was like a 8 out of 10 if I had to just grade it without thinking about it too hard. So that brings us to our final topic, Final Fantasy 14. So we're actually dropping the number down by 1 and going back to Final Fantasy 14. Final Fantasy 14 Stormblood. It just came out yesterday. There was early access if you pre-ordered it as of last Friday. And I did the review. It's up on the website now. It's a pretty lengthy review. I think it's probably the longest review that I've actually written. But yeah, from what I played, I think it was actually really good. Originally, I was kind of saying that it was going to be worse than Heaven's Sword, which was the previous expansion that came out 2 years ago. But so far, I think that for the most part, everything about it's delivered on all fronts, with the one exception being the fact that Square Enix still has underestimated the amount of players that log in on the servers, because the server issues and then the quest issues and the instance problems, getting disconnected from the server on early access was rampant, especially on the first day. And then again on release day, as yesterday, the same exact issues that we saw on Friday cropped up again with people getting kicked out of the game. So that was really the main thing that I dinged it on the review. I gave it an 8. If you round it down, it's an 8 out of 10. If you round it up, it's like an 8.5. But the main complaint was the accessibility, which is basically the server, like how easy it is to get in and start playing. Because that sort of thing, you want to play Stormblood when it's new, when everybody's questing, when everybody's queuing up for dungeons. And I think that they've really underestimated the fact that they're marketing this thing saying we've got 6 million subscribers worldwide. I mean, if you look at the launch trailer, which is embedded on the site, it shows at the end, it's like, join 6 million adventures worldwide. So, I mean, you've got a lot of subscribers if you're claiming 6 million. That's kind of like WoW vanilla numbers.
I don't even think it's 6 million. It's just 6 million accounts.
It's 6 million accounts, but the thing is, when are those accounts most active? It's
So
it's like right now it's peaking at 6 million, and you can't even log in. I mean, I was reading this article. There was a data center. So what Square Enix tried to do, so for North America they have two main data centers. They have I think it's Ether, and the other one, I forgot what the other one was called, Primal or something, and they're 2 for North America.
3.
The what?
They have 3.
No, I think they have 3 for Japan, they have 2 for North America, and they have 1 for the European Union, which that is a mistake. That's a big mistake. And here's why. So they realized, we got a lot of fans in the European Union. We got a lot of European people playing this game. But we only have 1 data center and 1 set of servers. So what do? They turn on like 2 additional servers, and they offer people to transfer to those new servers. They're going to give them free gil. They're going to give them like free EXP boost so they level up super fast. Almost like a private server in terms of how fast you level. So they tempted people to join to those servers, and they succeeded in getting a lot of people. But the problem was, so many people transferred over to those servers thinking that they would be low population, so they would be able to get in. And it was the complete opposite. Like, too many people transferred over to those two servers to the point where you try to log in on your character, and you're getting hit with queue lines exceeding 17,000. It's telling you, like, we're not talking 1,700, we're talking 17,000. That's 3 zeros. So you want to play the game, and you can't even log in because it's like you gotta wait 90 minutes minimum just to play the game. So it's, yeah, that I gave him a 6 out of 10 because of that in terms of accessibility. But everything else from the, let's just go down the list here. So the story, I gave it a 9. It's the thing about this game is
the story.
So I haven't finished the story yet, but from what I've played, it's basically a 9. It's right up there with your typical Final Fantasy story. It's like it delivers on all fronts. Characters, the voice acting, the character development, even the fact that they use Shakespearean English dialogue, very much like Final Fantasy XII. I don't know, not a lot of people like that, but I think that it gives the game world a unique feel from a design point of view. So I think that's actually really cool that they did that.
Dialogue boxes.
Hmm?
Forget the dialogue boxes.
Oh yeah, you can turn it on auto now.
I know.
You got auto dialogue finally. I mean, they should have done that since vanilla, but still. So I give it a 9. I actually like the story in Stormblood more than Heavensward's story.
Mm-hmm.
Heavensward's story, for those that don't know, it was basically the war between the Ishgard nation fighting the dragons. So it's basically humans versus, or not humans, but like
Dravinians.
The Dravinians fighting the dragons. So that was Heavensward. So this time around, it shifts back to the way it was in Vanilla or 2.0, which was a Realm Reborn story where you're the true enemy is the Garlean Empire. So it's got the whole like traditional Final Fantasy feel in terms of there's this evil empire and you're in an alliance with these other nations that are trying to free these oppressed nations that are under control by the Garlean Empire. So I think that's actually really cool. I liked it a lot so far from what I played. I have yet to finish the story completely, but from what I played, it's definitely good. It feels like a Final Fantasy game, and the story has so much depth.
I like that it has more like choices for the player to like interact.
Yeah, there's like Mass Effect style dialogue
more
choices.
Dialogue choices than there used to be, which I wish there was more of before. Doesn't make your character just look like he just nods his head to everything.
Yeah, and this game is definitely, like, I highly recommend it for anybody who's a Final Fantasy fan, although I probably don't even need to say that at this point, but, I mean, it's got all they call them icons, but basically the summons, Diablo's in there, there's all kinds of, like, being an MMO, there's tons of side quests, different subplots, all kinds of different things, so many different varied dungeons. There's even a unique dungeon that has its own leveling system, so it's almost like playing a different game. And I think they're gonna add additional stuff like that in the future. There's the whole gambling aspect. It literally has the golden saucer from Sevens in there redone. They have I lost my chain of thought, but they have like it's an MMO, guys. You know, there's like so much stuff in there, but it's got the whole Final Fantasy theme going, so it's really cool. For the sound though, I gave that a 10. That's like the one thing that I gave it a 10 because, in my opinion, there's no other MMO that can compete on equal footing with 14 in terms of the audio. Like, Blizzard is probably Blizzard, like, WoW and Guild Wars are really the only other two that have... I mean, WoW does have good music, but it's, like, there's not enough of it compared to Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is, like, the whole time, it's just good. Like, it's they even have themes that they even remix like old themes like the battle theme for the Heavensward BGM. So I found that actually really interesting. So music, sound, audio is great. Perfect 10 out of 10. Story 9. Gameplay 9. Actually, I was a little bit torn on this. I might have scored this a little bit lower. I may have given it an 8, but I got used to it. That's the good thing about playing it long enough to figure it out. But they changed things with the battle system. Now they added like these new UI elements based off of your job. And they changed PvP quite a bit this time around. So PvP is actually a lot more easier to pick up and play now, but I feel like you don't have as many skills available as you did prior. So the other thing is the community. Compared to other MMOs, the community that plays this one is not, I feel, is not as toxic as the people who play other MMOs. I can't really speak too much on the Korean MMOs because I don't really see a whole lot of player interaction in those games. It just seems like it's all about looking cool, killing mobs.
Well, if you're talking about Black Desert, it's the most toxic game I've ever played. I can't speak on other ones, but, you know, in comparison to Final Fantasy is like Hello Kitty Island Adventure. Black Desert Online is like entering the internet for the first time.
So one of my free company got kicked from the company in Final Fantasy because he was role playing, and he was like apparently typing too much. I don't know the whole story, and then they just decided to kick him. And then I see him like a day later. He's like in another free company, and I'm like, "What happened, dude?" And he's like, "I got kicked for role playing." I'm like, "What?"
Can't
like,
get
what?
too explicit with your role
Apparently,
playing.
yeah, you can say whatever. You can't say whatever you want in Final Fantasy without getting in trouble. So,
Well, I don't know.
Careful out there, trolls.
I don't know the full story on that, so I don't know what to say on that. But overall, I think it was a good game. Or it's one of those games where it's like, you feel like the MMO genre, people have been saying that, oh, it's going to die off and be replaced by MOBAs. I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, this game seems to prove that point.
Oh, it won't die. MMOs don't die. I mean, look at RuneScape. That thing's still alive.
Yeah, but I don't know who plays
Look at
that.
Ragnarok. Well, the original one, I think, got kind of like... Is it being...
Yeah, but I mean,
anymore?
World of Warcraft... The thing is, World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy have... Not only do they have a strong footing with their game being really good, but they have a strong fan base as well outside of the MMO. Like, the people who like Final Fantasy, or the people who like the Warcraft and the Starcraft and the Diablo lore and all that other stuff.
Those are really the people that keep it going.
Yeah.
People that actually care about the lore. Well,
and it was a little bit different. I wouldn't say that, because I think that most people that play MMOs just playing MMOs because they like playing MMOs. But I think the genre is still relatively
guess they
strong.
like paying $15 for that one.
It's not as. I think that MMOs are not as strong as they were 10 years ago.
Well, it's because there's too many of them.
Man, they're repetitive. I'll say it.
Yeah, they're all repetitive. There's too many now, and a lot of them just follow the free-to-play model. And
a lot of them suck. Beta win. Like, you know how many of every single one that's exclusive to Steam, they're pay to win, and they suck. Just letting you know right now.
They're all bad.
Yeah, they try to draw you in with like a cool opening cinematic.
Yeah, Blade and Soul.
The best ones are the ones with...
And then you go and you start playing the game, and then you realize, what am I doing here? And this is horrible.
It's just people running around slaughtering creatures.
Yeah.
We all know the majority of you on the MMOs just want to be in a chat after you raided for 3 weeks and you got your stats up so you can make fun of people who don't. No, that's not the case. But yeah, you guys are chat hounds. I swear to God. MMOs is the only genre where I see people in the chat for the majority of the game that I will be actually doing gameplay. Like, I'll see the same names just in the chat the whole game. Like, I'll be playing 8 hours. It'll be an 8-hour session, and people just in the chat. That is the only genre I think where that is a thing. And MOBA, and I don't really see that in MOBAs at all. FPS is definitely not. Maybe it's because it's not really an option like in MMOs, but I have never seen the chat so active while people are doing nothing. Maybe they're idling around. No, but you can see them, like, you see when they're playing the market, they're just taking pictures or some shit.
Either they're sitting there crafting something, or they're I'll tell you what they're really doing. They're in queue. They're a DPS class, and they're in queue for like 2 hours waiting to do the trial for the main story.
That makes sense. That makes sense because I was that guy.
Yeah, that's the whole accessibility.
Although
thing.
I will admit, like, unless you actually like try to interact with people, playing MMOs solo is so boring.
I can imagine.
Like, I've gotten more, like, I started interacting more with Final Fantasy with people, just still, I'm getting sick of being bored, but like just grinding. It's just more entertaining when you just mess around with people.
Yeah, the thing is, and that's the reason why so many of those free-to-play games fail, in my opinion. They fail because there's no interaction. There's very little interaction.
No,
and
Because it's all about the grind fest.
it's the grind fest, and you're just trying to get the gear, and there's no other.
Matter.
Yeah, there's like no other incentive. And the games that succeed, like in Final Fantasy's case, there's so many other things to do that are not just grind fest. Like like if you want, you don't even have to level any combat class up. I mean, it's probably not, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could if you wanted. You could become one of those guys who is like a billionaire in game.
Don't do it.
And has like all control the market boards, and you can buy a home and then flip it and do all this kind of stuff. So, and there's people out there that they play the game.
Costs in Final Fantasy.
If you really try, yeah.
You can resell the house in Final Fantasy.
You can
sell property.
You can sell your property. Why not? If you don't want it anymore.
Well,
I mean, that's how the price is.
The only thing free MMOs, the Korean MMOs in particular, have going for them is their combat. Their gameplay is way more fun than
spectacular. I can't relate to the story in any capacity.
Yeah, you don't even care about it. You just want to beat stuff up.
Yeah, you just want to do the moves. You just want to do the moves.
You feel OP, man. You feel OP. That's what makes it so fun. But then, like,
one thing also, the level variation isn't noticeable at all either. Like, you can grind for days in a Korean MMO, and if you PvP someone who's like level 14 and you're level 60, it's still not that much of a variation. Yeah, the health pool is different, but as far as abilities looking flashy, from level 1, your abilities look great in specific ones. Like Final Fantasy, if you're level 1, you're trash. Utter garbage. Level 10, garbage. Level 40, garbage. Level 50, garbage. Like unless you're max level in Final Fantasy, you really don't feel like you accomplished anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Well, comparatively to other people, but I think, like, at 50... item level actually starts mattering.
Let's be honest, it doesn't. Come on.
No,
in the grand scheme of things.
Well, it does make leveling easier.
That is true. It does make leveling up your classes easy, but in the grand scheme of things, in a game where everybody's already maxed out at this point, level 50 is nothing. You're gnat. One thing I like to give the Korean MMOs that are variation, the gratification that you get, it's satisfying. The ability to get a house early on in game in an MMO, it actually changes the monotony, the grind fest, fishing, simple things that's what I think Final Fantasy does right. There's not a lot to do in the traditional ones. Like, even popular ones like Terra, I feel like they just need to add more to it. Like, I feel like the MMO genre itself has been around too long for it to be set standards, and it's too crazy to venture away from. That's where I think the Korean MMOs have it right. They venture out. They do change some things.
Yeah, a lot of them are sandbox based. They have a lot of like build your own stuff, right? And you actually feel like it. You're actually, progressing in that way.
But then again, there are plenty of people who don't like change. So I'm sure a pick your poison type of scenario, like with anything.
Okay. Well, I think that's basically it for this podcast. You can check us out at gtrnexus.com. We'll be back week after next week with the episode 5. And we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks.
Click my stuff.
Bye.
Donate to me on Patreon.